Someone does something that hurts you. Not on purpose, maybe. Or maybe you're not sure. You wait for them to say something. To notice. To come back with a soft voice and the right words. But they don't. They move on. They make coffee. They change the subject. They seem completely fine. And you're left holding something they don't appear to feel at all. Most of us know this moment from the other side too. The moment after we've done something wrong. The stomach drop. The replay. The need to fix it, say it, make it right. That feeling arrives almost before the thought does. Guilt shows up fast, and it stays until something is resolved. But not for everyone. Some people move through the same moment differently. They know what happened. They're not blind to it. But the guilt doesn't come. Or it comes very quietly, barely enough to notice. They don't feel pulled to apologize. Not because they don't care about the other person. Not because they think they're always right. It's just that the internal alarm that usually sounds in those moments is quieter in them. Or absent. And they've probably noticed how that lands with others. Because when an apology doesn't come, people tend to fill the silence themselves. They decide what it means. That the person is cold. Selfish. Unaware. Proud. The story builds quickly, and it's rarely generous. The person who doesn't apologize easily often ends up carrying a reputation they didn't choose. Not because of what they did, but because of what they didn't say afterward. This is not about people who genuinely don't care. It's not about cruelty dressed as confidence. It's about something quieter and harder to place. The person who feels things deeply in other ways. Who processes differently. Who doesn't perform remorse because the remorse isn't there in the shape others expect. It just looks, from the outside, like they don't care at all. And that gap between what's inside and what others see is where this episode lives. Jung would not look at this person and see a problem. He would look at them and ask what the guilt is supposed to be doing, and why it might not be doing it here. Guilt, in the way most people feel it, is a signal. It says something went wrong and something needs to be repaired. It pulls you back toward the other person. It creates discomfort until you act. In that sense, it works like a kind of inner pressure, keeping people connected to each other, keeping behavior inside a certain range. But Jung understood that not everyone's inner world is wired the same way. What looks like absence isn't always emptiness. Sometimes it's a different kind of processing. The feeling is there, but it doesn't arrive as guilt. It arrives as distance, or heaviness, or a quiet withdrawal that the person themselves might not have a name for. There's also something worth sitting with here. Guilt can be genuine, but it can also be performed. Many people apologize quickly not because they feel it but because the discomfort of not apologizing is unbearable. The apology is relief for themselves as much as repair for the other person. It ends the tension, it closes the loop. The person who doesn't apologize easily might actually be more honest. Not more right. Just less willing to say something they don't feel. Jung would also notice what might be protected here. Sometimes the absence of guilt is a wall. Something built early, when feeling too much was too costly. A child who learned that remorse didn't change anything, that softening didn't make things safer. So something closed. Not forever, not completely, but enough to make guilt feel distant, even now. And that's not coldness, that's armor that was once necessary and never quite came off. Jung wouldn't ask this person to feel differently. He would ask them to look honestly at what's underneath. Not to fix it, just to see it. Because sometimes what looks like not caring is actually something much older than that. There is a story that gets told about people who don't apologize easily. It doesn't always arrive as words, it arrives as a look, a coolness, a slow withdrawal from someone who expected something and didn't get it. The story is already forming before anyone says anything out loud. And the story goes like this. A good person feels guilt, a good person says sorry. If you don't, something must be missing in you. Nietzsche would find this very interesting. Not because he thought guilt was worthless, but because he spent a great deal of time watching how moral stories form around behavior that unsettles people. How quickly a label appears, how rarely anyone stops to ask where the label came from. He wrote about guilt not as a natural feeling but as something that was slowly built. Shaped by communities that needed people to stay in line. To repair quickly, to show remorse in visible, recognizable ways. Nietzsche saw guilt as deeply social before it was ever personal. A mechanism, a way of keeping people accountable to each other, yes, but also a way of keeping them manageable. So when someone moves through a situation without the expected remorse, Nietzsche would not immediately ask what's wrong with them. He would ask what the expectation is doing there in the first place. Who benefits when people apologize quickly? What the apology is actually repairing, the harm or the discomfort of those watching. Because Nietzsche noticed that what gets called weakness or coldness is often just a refusal to perform. And performance, he understood, is what groups run on. The person who doesn't apologize hasn't necessarily caused more harm than anyone else. They've simply failed to give the signal that says I'm still one of you, I still follow the same rules, you can relax now. Nietzsche would say that signal matters enormously to the group. More, sometimes, than what actually happened. And the person who withholds it, even without meaning to, will often find that the silence is treated as the greater offense. Not what they did but what they didn't say after. Freud would sit quietly with this one, he wouldn't rush to explain it, but he would notice something that others tend to skip over. That the way a person relates to guilt now usually has a long history behind it. And that history rarely announces itself. Most people learn guilt early. Not from a book or a conversation but from the air in a room, from a parent's face, from the feeling of having done something wrong and watching what happened next. Whether softening helped, whether saying sorry changed anything, whether remorse was met with warmth or with more coldness. The body remembers all of this long before the mind can name it. For some people that learning went one way. Guilt arrived, apology followed, things softened, the loop closed. And so guilt became a familiar signal with a familiar resolution. It felt uncomfortable but it also felt useful. But for others the loop didn't close that cleanly. Maybe the apology didn't help, maybe the remorse was there but the repair never came, maybe feeling guilty was just another way of feeling bad with no way out of it. And so something quietly adjusted. Not as a decision, just as a response to what kept happening. Freud would say this didn't start today. The person who doesn't feel guilt easily, or who doesn't move toward apology the way others expect, is often someone whose early experience taught them something different about what vulnerability does. About whether opening up leads to repair or to more exposure. And that lesson, learned young and never quite unlearned, sits underneath everything. Not visible, not dramatic, just there. This is not about blame. Not about what was done wrong in some distant room. Freud wasn't interested in accusation. He was interested in the quiet logic of how people protect themselves. And how protection, once built, doesn't always know when it's safe to come down. The person who doesn't apologize easily may not be withholding. They may simply never have learned that offering that part of themselves leads anywhere safe. That's not arrogance, that's a very old and very quiet kind of caution. Arendt watched groups carefully. Not the loud moments, the quiet ones. The way a room shifts when someone doesn't do what was expected. The way belonging gets measured not just by what people do but by what they're willing to give up, willing to show, willing to perform in front of others. She would notice something very specific. That an apology is not just a private exchange between two people, it's a public act. Even when no one else is watching, it carries social weight. It says something to the group, to the relationship, to the unspoken rules that hold both people in place. And when it doesn't come, the group feels it. Even if the group is just one other person. Arendt understood that participation in social rituals is how trust gets built and maintained. Not through grand gestures but through small repeated acts of showing up in the expected way, saying the expected thing, moving through conflict in the way that others recognize and can respond to. Apology is one of those rituals. It's a hand extended, a door reopened, a signal that the relationship is still worth tending. When that signal doesn't come, something shifts. The other person doesn't just feel unheard, they feel unseen. And from there the distance builds quietly, without announcement. Invitations slow down, warmth cools. The relationship doesn't end dramatically, it just gradually stops being maintained. Arendt would say this is not punishment exactly, it's something more automatic than that. Groups regulate themselves through inclusion and exclusion, and they do it mostly without thinking. The person who doesn't apologize easily doesn't get voted out. They just find, over time, that fewer doors are open, that they are tolerated but not quite trusted, present but not quite included. And the painful part is that they often don't know exactly when it happened. There was no conversation, no confrontation, just a slow and quiet closing. This is what the silence costs. Not always, not with everyone, but often enough that it leaves a mark. Even on people who never felt the guilt that was supposed to prevent it.